And joining us now on the line from New York, New York, John McWhorter. He is author of All About the Beat, Why Hip-Hop Can't Save America. John, thanks for joining us on TVO tonight. How are you?
Thank you. I'm good. How are you?
Glad to hear it. I'm good as well. You have said that hip-hop, rather than empowering black youth, does the opposite, that it disempowers them because it doesn't tell the truth about the real world. Tell us how so.
Well, what I mean by that is that I think a lot of people think that because rap is high volume and because rap questions authority, that it's a kind of higher wisdom, and I think a lot of people are very excited about the idea that people are both relating to this music with their gut and that there might be a possibility of this gut level excitement translating into something that you do with your head, into making people's lives better, and especially poor black people's lives better. But I think that if you actually listen to what the lyrics are saying, and I don't mean as tired a point as listening to the rap of 50 Cent and people like that with the guns and the nasty words. That's all been done. I mean the different kind of rap that's more thoughtful. And so we're talking about the Kanye West kind of rap, the Common kind of rap, the kind of rap that makes rap fans say it's not all like that when you talk about 50 Cent. If you listen to the lyrics of that kind of rap, which is becoming more and more mainstream, what you're seeing is a kind of unfocused cynicism that isn't really about acknowledging what we can actually do for poor black people. It's just complaint for its own sake, and it often misdepicts what the real situation is. That worries me.
Well, let me follow up on that with one of your, I think, more intriguing notions on one of America's most important social programs, namely welfare. You've described welfare as, quote unquote, riot insurance. Does hip-hop music get that?
No. And most people don't get that. It's actually the lost chapter of black history. Very briefly, welfare starts out as a program mostly aimed at white widows in the 30s. Then, in the late 60s, it was expanded into an open-ended program where you got more and more money for each child that you had, and there was no real interest in job training. And you could just live on it forever, which was not the case with the old-fashioned kind of welfare. And the reason that was done was because, especially in the wake of the long, hot summers with the riots in black sections of many cities, there was a sense that to expand welfare in that way would be a way of placating, would be a way of acknowledging the past. There were many very smart people who thought that that kind of welfare would actually lift poor black people into the middle class. And I may have been one of those people thinking that then. It wasn't that anybody knew what the outcome was going to be. But as a result, you got a new kind of black community where most people didn't know their father very well, where working full-time was an option, and all sorts of other social ills happen. And people who were there know this, and people who are social scientists know this in a sense, but the actual centrality of the expansion of welfare in the late 60s is not very well known. And as a result, when rappers are complaining about the situation of people's lives, the general implication tends to be that it's white America's fault, that after the Civil Rights Revolution, things didn't really change as much as you think, because look at the state of these ghettos. When the fact of the matter is that a lot of what happened to American inner cities starting in the late 60s was because of a misguided benevolence with people white and black thinking that teaching people to live on the dole, who beforehand had not been, and that really is exactly what happened to many, many millions of people, that somehow wasn't significant. And it's because most rappers don't know about it. But that doesn't mean that they're right.
Does rap music, though, also not serve to reinforce the notion in the black communities that Whitey is afraid of us, and that's not such a bad thing?
Well, I did not say that in my book, but I would not necessarily disagree. There's a basic paradigm, and that paradigm is that the power structure, not individual white people, but the power structure is keeping poor blacks poor. That means that racism of a kind is keeping poor blacks poor. And then the paradigm, the schema, the scene that we're encouraged to think of is that we black people need to rise up. And so there's the whole revolution idea. And so, of course, the notion of fear becomes important. We have to make them afraid of us. We have to talk in loud, strong, menacing voices, etc. I think that that schema is mistaken in terms of the causes of what's going on now, which are much more complex. And I think that that schema is mistaken in terms of the sorts of things that actually help poor black people that we're watching help poor black people, which is what I think all of our concerns are. Instead, it's just a kind of a theater, and I like theater too. I'm a big theater fan. But when that theater starts being translated into an idea that it's activism while black people are staying poor, then I think somebody needs to speak up.
Well, let me pursue that notion of revolution that you just touched on, because you write that hip-hop essentially has two messages. Number one, things really suck. And number two, things are going to keep on sucking until there's a revolution, and Whitey finally gets it and does a complete 180. So talk to us about what this notion of revolution actually means in that context.
Well, of course, people don't usually put it in so many words, but there's an idea that the way the country runs right now needs to be changed on a very fundamental level. And so this is something that, for example, an avowed leftist would not argue with, and a lot of the people who are speaking for black people, white or black, are leftists. And the idea is that something really different has to happen. There's going to have to be some sort of redistributive policy, for example, or even if you're talking about the idea that white America needs to realize something. So we all know that white people in America realized something in a major, unprecedented, almost counterintuitive way in the 60s. Suddenly racism became unfashionable. Suddenly you had the way paved for the world that I have grown up in, and I'm thankful for the people who died to create the world that I grew up in. But there's a sense that white people need to realize more, that somehow the other shoe hasn't dropped. White people didn't realize enough. And that somehow there's going to be this great new day when white people realize their culpability, when white people get in touch with the fact that there's an inner racist in them that they didn't know about. I understand where people are coming from when they're thinking that that's what we need, but I see no signs that those things are going to happen, one. And two, I don't think that those things need to happen. The idea that the descendants of African slaves in the United States in the beginning of the 21st century are the only people in the history of the human species who can only achieve under perfect conditions like those, or even anything approaching perfect conditions. It's disempowering, I find it humiliating, and more to the point, it's just inaccurate. I think that we need a different model of black uplift.
Okay, do you think there is an inner racist inside every white person?
Probably, but I don't care. I mean, when it was a matter of open bigotry, I think that it was a miracle and a wonderful thing that we got rid of legalized segregation in this country. As to whether if you do an elaborate psychological test on a white person, you'll find that inside they might have certain feelings that they didn't know about and that they never act on, or that they only act on in very subtle ways. I find that a useless subject of inquiry, because I don't think that that kind of racism is what's any black person's problem. There's probably an inner racist in me. I think I have bigger fish to fry. So yeah, but we're encouraged to focus on it too much out of what is really a fashion rather than a sincere engagement with how to make people's lives better.
Let's see if one of those bigger fish is capitalism and how you make it work for you. Is the problem with capitalism that its solutions for individuals, its solutions are for individuals? In other words, finding, a job to meet an unemployed person's needs. Mm-hmm. It doesn't work so much for groups, mm-hmm. and therefore, black politics still longs for a collective solution, and capitalism really isn't designed to provide for that.
Well, you could say that, although, of course, in terms of collective solutions, one way you could conceive of collectivism is there being a sense in black culture that it's possible for individuals to do better than we're often told. And so, for example, the saddest kind of juxtaposition for me is that in the 70s and the 80s, notion set in among smart people and people, whether they're smart or not, in communities themselves, that poor black Americans did not have sufficient educational opportunities unless they went to college. But in the meantime, immigrants were coming into the same communities, many of them actual Africans, and doing stuff and showing that, well, it's not as if there was no way to make a living. And I'm not criticizing the people in question, because a culture can fall under an ideology. After a while, you do what you grow up in. How can a child know? If a child grows up into a certain situation, why would it be surprising if by the age of 12 or 15 that child is doing the sorts of things it saw before? That child is an innocent. Nevertheless, a notion set in that, it's like a jungle sometimes for poor black Americans, that that's all there is. And that won't do. Capitalism is easier for some people than others. And I think that in a just society, we need to have programs to show poor black people how to take advantage of a capitalist society. And I write about those things in the book. So it's not my idea is not just turn off the hip hop and get real. I say keep the rap on. I mean, everybody should enjoy it. I like a lot of it myself. But don't let its message get through to you that there's nothing you can do until the world is perfect. Instead, take advantage of the things that society offers that help to teach poor people how to get back into the game, because those things do exist.
Well, of course, Bill Cosby has been preaching individual responsibility over historical grievance for a long time. How well do you think he's doing?
I don't know how well he's doing formally, but I know that the fact that he's kept at it for years now has helped to mainstream the idea of individual responsibility. And it's important. That phrase makes it sound like, again, the idea is, look, you gangbanger, just kind of, brush yourself off and go get a darn job. And that message can only do so much. For me, it's less about individual responsibility than there being a collective responsibility to be oriented towards teaching people how to cope, rather than telling people that it's noble if they don't cope. But to the extent that we're going to use the term individual responsibility, it is much less controversial now to say that racism is not black people's main problem than it was 10 years ago. And I think that Cosby has helped play a part in that.
John, let's talk some politics, okay?
Okay.
You know what that means, Barack Obama.
Yes,
okay.
These days.
Let me ask you whether you think Obama's candidacy has done so well, in part because he conveys an image to white America that says, you don't have to feel so guilty about all of the past anymore.
Yes, and I say that as a Barack Obama fan. There's a lot more to him than that. But certainly there is an element in him that makes a certain demographic of white American feel that to support him and to vote for him shows that you are or we are beyond the evils of the past. And what that means, I mean, you can say that as a criticism. I don't think of it as a criticism. I think of it as one of many signs that we've come a long, long way, and that whatever that inner racist is that we're always encouraged to think about is becoming a much smaller entity. And I think that we really just need to look at how unprecedented it would be that a black candidate would run and their color would help. Not very long ago, it was Jesse Jackson running, and the idea was very clear that his color was a hindrance. Now we have somebody coming along where being black helped. If he were white, we wouldn't know about him yet, as competent as he is. So it's been a magic moment.
He's not very hip-hop, though, is he?
No, but it's interesting that he has to make gestures towards it sometimes. He has to indicate that he, has some Jay-Z in his iPod, because that is now America's music, and the youth vote is such an important part of the Obama phenomenon.
He does like to play basketball, too, doesn't he? And he's pretty good at it, from what I hear.
That's right.
What is your sense of black America's willingness to give up on the anger that we've talked about?
Well, I think that if you've got that kind of anger and you're grown, you're probably never going to let it go. Like I said, you learn the language that you grow up hearing. And I think that that anger, as I've written elsewhere, is something that you can found an identity upon. It's a way of coping with some of the racial ambiguities that there are in America at this moment, or that you grew up with if you were born in the late 60s, as I was, in an America where there was no more official segregation, but you couldn't say that racism was completely gone, and you ran up against things as you became an adolescent and things like that. But I actually think that that anger, to the extent that I think that it's departed from being connected firmly to reality in many cases, will dissipate if Barack Obama is elected among the generation of people, white and black, but I do think more about the black ones, who grow up with a black president in office. There's a black man who's getting out of Air Force One every day, and he's on your laptop as president with his wife and his kids. And that goes on for 8 years. I don't think that when someone starts telling you when you come of age that America is based on racism, that you're going to be able to hear it as any kind of truth. That doesn't mean that you're going to be a Pollyanna, but I really do think that he could be a sign of real progress in dealing with the race problem more honestly than I think we do. Many people would say we have to deal with it more honestly in talking about the inner racists. I would say we have to deal with it more honestly in allowing that it's not as important as it used to be.
His former preacher, though, Jeremiah Wright, would certainly suggest that there's still, plenty of people who are not prepared to embrace that, and there's lots of good reasons still to be angry and black in America today. What do you think of that?
Well, he is not a young man, and so he's minted in an era when that kind of sentiment made more sense. He grew up in Jim Crow America. And also, as I've written, there is a recreational joy that a black person can take, even if they're much younger than right, in listening to that kind of rhetoric and thinking of it as a kind of gesture towards one part of one's life, but not something that defines one's life. Or also, if you're an educated black person, I think that, and I don't have any official data for this, but I think that there is a sense that you are showing your awareness that you're fortunate and that you're not looking down on poor black people by cheering at rhetoric like that, even if you would never say anything like that yourself, and even if you know deep down that a lot of it does not follow. The kind of rhetoric that we've seen him using on YouTube, I think for most black people is sport. It's not actual, it's not actual.
It's not real.
It's not actual dialogue. It is not anything actually spiritual. And I think a lot of white people had a hard time understanding that. So that was probably one of the saddest parts of the Obama candidacy so far.
Let me get you to weigh in on the thesis of Shelby Steele's book about Barack Obama called The Bound Man, where he defines black leaders in one of two ways. They're either challengers or bargainers. Challengers are the people like Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton. The bargainers are people like Oprah and Tiger Woods. I guess Cosby's on that list too, Barack Obama. People who don't make a large point in their lives of trying to provoke white guilt. Are the crucial white, lower class, Appalachian, I guess is the word we're looking for here, voters, influenced by the bargainers, in your view?
Well, you know, actually, I think that what we're seeing with that kind of working class white voter is that, of course, they're completely closed to the challengers, but I don't think that the bargainers interest them very much. A lot of people seem to think that Obama's hard time in connecting with working class white people is because of the racism latent in them. And I think that that's a rather condescending thing to say about those people. I think that Barack Obama's being black is just not that important to them. There's not a part of their identity that's based on showing that they're okay by not being racist. I think that educated whites tend to forget to what extent that is a fetish of college town communities and blue America and having higher degrees. And so I think when it comes to that working class kind of voter, Obama is in the position of having to just come across more as a person. I don't think that those people are terribly interested in the bargain. And that's been an odd thing about the Obama story.
Let me ask you one more thing, John, and that is about the Bradley effect. And for those who don't know what I'm talking about, this is a reference to Tom Bradley, the former Los Angeles mayor, who ran for governor of California, I guess about 25 years ago, was leading significantly in all the public opinion polls leading up to Election Day. And then when people got into the privacy of that voting booth, they didn't vote for him, and he lost quite dramatically. And there have been a number of other examples throughout American history of similar things happening to black candidates who looked solid going in and not so much coming out. Doug Wilder, David Dinkins, some other names. How much do you fear the Bradley factor rearing its head on November the 4th with Barack Obama?
I fear it not at all. And that's because of something often forgotten, which is that the cases you mentioned, they were a long time ago. And so there was a Bradley effect. But one of the most interesting things about what we saw once the primaries began is that it didn't happen. And so Barack Obama had his win in Iowa, and that left a lot of people not quite knowing where to grab on. And then in New Hampshire, he didn't win, despite polls suggesting that he was going to. And immediately the smart thing to do was to start talking about the Bradley effect. Suddenly the Wikipedia entry on the Bradley effect expanded right that day. And the fact is, after people checked the data, it was shown that it wasn't that people did not vote for Obama. It was that more people than expected voted for Hillary Clinton, who had not said anything about voting for Obama. So there was no Bradley effect, according to almost any analysis in New Hampshire. And I think it's pretty clear that we didn't see any such thing with the way Obama took it so handily in so many cases as the primaries went on. So I see no reason to expect that. That was something which we can see as a sign of a transition between the really bad old days and today's much closer to good old days. You would expect that to have been the case in, say, the 80s, and that's what it was. I think there are new generations of voters now. There's a new consensus. There's a new kind of black person, talking about the bargainer. I think that will be the least of Barack Obama's problems.
All About the Beat, Why Hip Hop Can't Save America, is your latest book. John McWhorter, it's good of you to join us on the line from New York. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.